to do a video showing a tip that I have learned since I've been working on this Baja bug through experience, not on just information that I'm picking up on the internet and on YouTube and whatnot. So I want to try and bring that tip to you guys so that if one of you are working on a Baja bug or a trophy truck or a drift car or just something where you're possibly working on some control arms, I want to pass this on to possibly save you some headaches that I have already gone through. This is my my lower control arm for the rear A-arm suspension that I'm working on. And what I want to point out here is there's a strategic way that I'm welding this up. These are the bungs that are going to go on the chassis. And these, I'm welding both of these on solid. At this point, everything's just tacked in place, but my intention is when I put the top plate on here, I'm going to weld this all up solid, including both of these bungs. Now at this end here, this is the end with the rectangular bungs for the heims that are going on the spindle. Now what I'm doing here is, this one here, you can see it's tack welded back here, and when I weld this up, I'm going to weld this solid in when I weld on the top plate with the control arm. So my intention is to weld this one up solid. Now this one here, you'll notice there's no tack welds. There's no tack welds here. There are, you can't see this, but there's a little tiny tack on the inside here. And there's a little tiny tack on the inside here that you cannot see. My intention with this bung is if I need to, I can knock it out of here and it will be loose. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to weld this thing up solid. This will be welded solid in place. This round bung will be welded solid in place. This bung will not be welded solid initially, and here's why. So down here on the chassis, these are the tabs where the chassis end of the control arm is going to bolt in place. So this will have the bushings in there, and it's going to bolt onto the chassis just like that. Now, these, as far as I'm concerned, are removable, and they are. If you look here, all I've done is tack them in place. They all have only one tack holding them in. So when I need to, I'm going to be able to just crack these right off and re-weld them in place. In my mind, that makes these movable. Now what's going to happen with that, these are in position where I want them. So what I'm going to do is this one here, I'm going to weld up solid. This one here, I will consider movable. Because one of these is considered movable, on my control arm down here, I can weld this up solid, knowing that if these move a little bit, which they will, I can make up for that difference in these tabs. Because what's going to happen is, when I weld this up, and these parts here are heated, they are actually going to make this bung shift a little bit. Most likely, it's going to shift this way, as well as this one is going to shift this way a little bit. Now, it's going to be minimal. It's going to be very minimal. However, in a situation like this where you don't have a lot of room for error, it would cause you a problem. So, on this end, these are going to be welded solid. This is going to be welded solid. These, if needed, I'll crack them off. I'll put the control arm up in place. That will show me exactly where those tabs need to go. And then I'll tack weld them in place while they're bolted to the control arm. Then I'll take the control arm off and then I'll weld them solid. That will put these perfectly aligned with the control arm. Okay? So that end, the chassis end, is pretty easy. Now, consider at the spindle end here, my spindle These points are not going to change. This spindle is already welded up solid. So these are not going to move. There will be no free play in these. And these are going to have the heims in them. Now you certainly do not want any undue stress on these heims. You want this to be a very natural fit. Now just like on this end of the control arm, when I weld this portion of the control arm solid, when I do all these welds, it's going to heat up, and it's going to have a tendency to pull this in a little bit and to pull this in a little bit. A little bit, not a lot. However, it's enough that if I welded this all up solid, put my heims in here, and then went to try and bolt this up, it, number one, might not fit at all. It, number two, might fit with a lot of tension, which would put undue stress on this heim, which is not good. I mean, these heims have nylon sleeves in here, and you don't want to be putting undue stress on that. So here's what I'm going to do. This one's going to be welded up solid. I'm going to weld all the control arm. This one, which is right now lightly tacked in place, I will not solid weld it. I'll weld up to it, but I'm not going to weld the bung to the control arm. Then I'm going to do all the solid welding on the control arm so that all the distortion that's going to take place with the control arm when I weld it will be done. At that point, I'll take this, I'll install the heims, and I'll attempt to bolt it up to the spindle here. Now, if it moved, which I think it will, then I'll have to crack this loose at the tacks, which I'll be able to do, and then I'll be able to reposition it off of the spindle here. And then once I have that, then I'll bolt it together with this heim kind of floating in place. At that point, I'll then put some tacks on here to hold this heim in place, and then I'll weld it up solid. And now at that point, I can weld it up solid because this control arm will already be welded solid, so all the distortion will have already taken place. Then all I'll have to do is weld up this rectangular heim, or the square bung. So that is my tip. My very important tip to you is if you're building a control arm, and really, if it's a flat stock control arm like this one, or if it's a round control arm made out of tubing, you still need to keep this in mind. If you have any points that you cannot modify, like these are modifiable because I can just tack these off and move them if I need to. However, on my spindle here, these are not changeable. These are now fixed points because this spindle's been welded solid. So I have to make sure that I weld my control arm first, get all of its distortion taking place before I solid weld these bungs. So that's it, guys. I hope that helps you. If you're building a control arm or doing some tubular work or something, keep that in mind. Thanks for watching the channel. Hope it helps.